Mental Maps is brought to you by Well. Well is a virtual holistic mental health service providing psychiatric evaluations, holistic interventions, and when needed, medication management. For more information, check out Well at www.arukawell.co. That's www.arukawell.co. Welcome back to Mental Maps. As always, I hope this finds you well no matter what season of life you're in. Today, I'm honored to be joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Sarah Michaud. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Joss. Really excited to be here. It sounds like you got looks like, and here feels like you got a great vibe. And I so appreciate your positive presentation. It's not always the case when you're having these discussions. So,
yeah. I'm my default mechanism, I think, is optimism. And so that's like, sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's not the greatest, but it always makes for some fun. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Especially as we were, getting on this, we had like all kinds of audio things going on. So who knows what's going to happen, but we're just all buckled up for this. This should be fun.
Yes.
So I'm honored that
we'll
you're
give it
here.
our best.
I'm honored that you're here. I know a lot of your work is really based in two components that many people believe are different, but at the end of the day, they're all very similar, and that's codependency and addiction. And so for you in the specialist world, I think, you mentioned right before we jumped on the show, the concept of codependency has kind of been lost in translation now. So for our listeners and just for us today, for our discussion, what is codependency?
Well, I mean, you can Google it and get 100 different definitions, but basically, for me, I'm way more focused on other people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors than mine. And I'm focused on changing or healing or fixing or saving someone else at the cost of my own mental health. So, I mean, it started back obviously with like Bill W. and his wife and Al-Anon and all that. And then Melody Beatty wrote that book. I think it was like in the 80s, Codependent No More. And the original definition was really about a woman married to a male alcoholic and how her life is going down the tubes because she's trying to fix him and save him from his alcoholism. But now it has a much broader definition, meaning you don't have to be married or in a relationship with an addict to be codependent. You can be codependent if you compromise yourself a lot in relationships, if you can't identify your needs or wants in relationships, if you have trouble identifying or sharing your feelings in relationships, if you're not being treated well and you accept unacceptable behavior. I mean, a lot of people who eventually become codependent really lose their own identities. Their identity becomes much more about being affirmed by the outside world, what you think of me, what my boss thinks of me, what my husband thinks of me, rather than what I think of myself. So it's really about not being in touch with what's happening inside of me, much more in touch with what's happening inside of you. So if I had a couple come in, for example, and there was an alcoholic and their spouse, very often if I would try to talk to the alcoholic about what was happening for him, the spouse would be answering the questions because she probably wanted him to get sober more than he did. And so why I eventually got so into this is because codependent people often don't see themselves as having a problem. So in that example, who had the problem really about the partner getting sober? If he doesn't want to get sober, who has the problem? The wife does, because she's miserable and she keeps trying to fix him. He doesn't want to change. And she needs to take responsibility for her own life, her own happiness, her own relationship. So that's what eventually really got me fascinated, that I have tons of compassion for people who are codependent. And I saw a lot of kind of a victim mentality or someone's doing this to me rather than, I need to own this. I need to own what I'm getting out of this. And, I also am someone in recovery, and I also married someone who was in recovery who relapsed, and my life blew up, Josh. And I thought to myself, if I see patients full time and I specialize in addiction, and I've gone to Al Anon for 20 years, and I, know a ton about codependency. I have a PhD and I am struggling with what to do, then the average person is going to be lost. And that's why I
Mm,
wrote the book and really started doing a deep dive.
mm.
Long answer.
No, I think that is very helpful, and I just wanna kinda go back to a couple things you said as we kinda work through this. So, absolutely, right,
Yes.
for me as a provider and just spending time with people, I remember being introduced to the concept of codependency really in the addiction space, right, and addiction treatment, and so as you're working with
Yes.
people, you'll find they have a significant other or something like that, and you're kinda working but you're saying that codependency isn't just in a relational when it comes to not even just addiction, not even have to be marriage, doesn't have to be, boyfriend, girlfriend, any of those things. It can be any
Nope.
relationship with another human.
Yes. I mean, I'll tell you what is a real thing that I'm fascinated in because I raised a child. I was a single parent. He's 25 now. But parenting, huge codependent relationship.
Huh.
Very many, many opportunities. I'll give you a great example. So, really, it's about me being uncomfortable with my feelings around my child's behavior or my child's feelings. So, I'm trying to control what my child is doing because I'm uncomfortable and I'm fearful.
Mm,
So, and again, of course, it's on a continuum. Parents obviously, set boundaries with their kids and, interact with their kids and parent their kids. But I'm going to give you an example of someone when my son went off to college and a mother of one of his friends called me. And she said, wow, Josh, her son had gone off to college and I'm really struggling with it. Can I get together with you? And we got together and she told me the following. She said, she was calling her son at college every morning at 7 o'clock to wake him up. Now, that to me is such a great example of a codependent behavior because her fear of her son failing at college is now
mm,
taking over in a controlling behavior of her son. And what it does is it doesn't allow the person to grow and develop. And
mm,
it's the same with a partner relationship, it's the same with a friend relationship. If I think I'm responsible for my partner and I start overcompensating, how are they gonna grow and change and develop and learn, etcetera?
mm,
A great quote from a parenting book I read once was, "If I keep packing my kids' backpack, they're gonna start thinking they can't do it." And that's kind of
mm,
the epitome of codependency.
mm. And so, I think that's really
Yeah.
important for all of us to kinda work through and kinda talk about in this space is that codependency, one, it sounds like what you're saying is that your sense of self, your identity is really made up in this other person or persons, right? In their
Yes.
behavior, in the way they act, in the way they think, maybe
Yes.
the way they feel, all of that is then either a direct reflection on who you are or it will dictate how you feel.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like, and the irony and the big lie I talk about is when you hear a codependent person talking, they're like, well, Johnny needs to do this and Johnny needs to do that. And I wish my husband would do this. And why isn't he going to stop drinking? And why is he? And yet, instead of like, so the focus is on the other person. And if only they changed, I would be okay. And that's the problem. The focus is on the wrong person because what
Mm,
happens when I try to change someone else? They just get pissed off and
mm,
it affects the relationship negatively. So, really, who I need to change is me. If
mm,
I say to my husband who's drinking, honey, I love you, the drinking is really affecting our marriage. I need you to know that if you can't go to treatment within a couple of weeks, I may ask you to move out or I may move out. That's where I'm presenting a boundary based on what I'm going to do, not on what, you need to go to AA, you need to do that. That goes nowhere. That there's
Mhm.
no power in that. There's a lot of power when I own and take responsibility for what I need and want. And that's the mantra of the codependent person in recovery. What do I need? What do I want?
Mm.
Instead of what do you need and what do you want?
And what I hear
Yeah.
in that too is like when we think of codependency, we think of these, these very chaotic, explosive kind of relationships. But you're saying too that this also can happen kind of very under the radar, if you will, right? You mentioned the stuff with parents and those kind of things. So if you're
Yeah.
someone out there that as you're listening to this is kind of resonating of like, I wonder if I'm doing this. How do you know if you have found
Yes.
yourself in one of these dysfunctional kind of relational experiences?
Yeah. Yes, great question. And I do want to say, so I see it on a continuum. So on one end, you've got maybe a new mother, right, who has a baby, who's afraid all the time. And because she's afraid, she becomes very controlling and doesn't want her husband to watch the baby and stuff like that. Okay, so that's kind of at one extreme, like controlling behavior out of fear, which is really the core of codependency. Then on the other hand, you have very volatile marriages of anger and rage and addiction. Or you have like some of my clients, like elderly parents that are going bankrupt because they've remortgaged their house 4 times to pay for their kids' treatment. Do you know what I mean? So there's two extremes and then there's everything in between. So, yeah, I mean, how you identify the thing with codependency, I think that people don't understand too is just like with addiction, which is lethal, I've seen people like literally die from codependency. I mean, I know that
Mm,
sounds crazy, but one of the core things of codependency is abandoning ourselves. So we'll be so hyper focused on people in our lives that we love that we won't go to doctors, we won't take care of ourselves, we won't exercise, we won't eat right. And literally, we'll avoid and neglect ourselves to the point of getting sick.
mm,
And if you're someone that's in a relationship and on a cycle of waiting for someone to change, sign. That's a sign that there's codependency. If you're in a relationship and you're chronically anxious or chronically depressed, or you're starting to get physical symptoms like headaches or stomach aches or, things like that. If you minimize and rationalize not speaking up a lot, oh, I couldn't say that to him because he might get upset. Big sign, big, big, big sign, because that means my partner's feelings are much more important than mine. And that's not a relationship. I mean, my partner's job is to be, nourishing towards himself and listen to me and nourish me. And we have an open dialogue and we can share feelings, we can share thoughts, we can tolerate someone being upset and we won't take it personally. I mean, those are all adult relationship things. And, relationships out of like childhood fears are relationships with people where, oh no, I couldn't say that, or I'm afraid to express that I'm upset. Those are all signs of codependency.
mm. Where do you think, in the work that you've done, right? Not only in the addiction space, but just in working with, all kinds of different people. Where is this coming from, right? I think about, Ericksonian stages of development. And so we know like a stable sense of self is very important and we learn it, early on in life and it kind of adapts over time. But when you think of this, and I think of
Yeah.
this unstable sense of self and the sense of self is then met through other humans and their behaviors, where do you find this coming from most of the time?
Well, I really think, I mean, simplistically, Josh, we learn skills early on, right? So from 0 to say 7 or 8, right? We're interacting with our parents, we're getting messages, we're creating our own little worlds of what we think. about our parents, those object relationships. Our interaction with our parents are our first critical relationships. So if you grow up in addiction, if you grow up with a parent who's overreactive and angry, and you spent all your time trying to ameliorate their feelings,
Mhm.
it's all about, was I able to express myself normally? Or did I become preoccupied with what my parents were thinking and
Mm.
feeling? And that happens a lot in addictive homes, or homes where one parent is angry, where one parent is depressed, where one parent is like perhaps a victim working 70 hours a week, a single mom. It's this dynamic where the child feels responsible for the parent's thoughts and feelings.
Mm.
I mean, I think that's where the early development, my identity becomes about taking care of, or at least managing how my parents are feeling. So it's
Mhm.
my job not to be a kid. They call it being parentified, right? Where
Mhm.
suddenly I feel responsible.
Mhm.
So I think that, those early dynamics, I think, are the base, because
Mhm.
how we learn to relate to people and the fears we have in interpersonal relationships, I think those develop early on also.
Mhm.
And the core of codependent behavior is really fear.
Mhm.
And it's not like fear of snakes or heights or, I don't know, bugs.
Yeah.
It's really about, I'm afraid of what you're going to feel. I'm afraid of what you're going to do. I'm afraid of you rejecting me. I'm afraid of you abandoning me. I'm afraid of you not loving me, you not liking me. So my identity becomes wrapped around how you respond to me rather than how I feel about myself.
Mhm.
I think that's the core.
Well, it makes me think too that this concept of codependency, right, as you're explaining it today, almost sounds like a faulty defense mechanism, right? Because at one
Mm,
time this worked, right? Like it kept the kids safe, or it maintained a
yes.
relationship, or it kept your financial stability going, or whatever that looks like, right? So this dependency, you know, isn't like you woke up one day and you're like, man, I want to be wildly connected to this human being. But instead, like, you woke up and you
Right.
were trying to as you said, fear, and fear as a human, that emotion drives so much. And so it's just that the
Yes.
unfortunate part is they felt a really unhelpful way to meet their need.
Yes, you know what? That's brilliant. I always say that, like, I don't see these symptoms as pathological. I just see them as how we developed as kids, like you just said, to feel okay, to feel safe. It was what we learned to do to survive. The trouble is, when we become adults, those behaviors no longer work, or we don't need them, but we still think we do. So say, for example, a kid lied a lot because it made him feel safe, and then you get into an adult relationship and you just forget that you learned to lie a lot, and that's what you do. So it's like really identifying, what are those behaviors that I learned as a kid that I really needed, but
Mhm.
now as an adult, like a people pleasing behavior, like compromising myself all the time because I'm afraid of my partner getting upset. Like that behavior, literally doesn't please anyone because, first of all, I'm compromising something in me out of fear of them being upset. So I'm going to get a resentment. And then I'm not really being authentic. I'm not being my real self. I'm not necessarily telling the truth, so that creates a split in the relationship. I mean, I always give this example of, someone saying, "Hey, honey, what do you want to eat? Where do you want to go to dinner tonight?" And the person says, say the person wants Italian, but they know their partner loves Indian food. And so they get like, oh my God, I really want Italian, but they start spiraling in their head. This is like such a simple example, but it happens all the time. And instead of them saying, "Honey, I really like Italian, but I'm okay if we get Indian tonight. Like, let's do that. Like, what do you think?" They end up saying, "Well, let's go to Indian," even though they wanted Italian. I mean, it's like a small example, but say then they do that one time, and then they do it two times, and then they do it in other parts of their relationship, and they start dismissing what they need and what they want. what is the consequence of that is I'm going to become a resentment machine.
Mm,
And then if I'm uncomfortable with anger, I'm going to become someone who's going to act out in other ways or have other coping skills to repress the anger.
mm,
So it sounds so like benign when you say, oh, I had a people pleasing behavior. Oh, it didn't matter. But when it becomes a pattern of dismissing yourself and acquiescing, big consequences, including addiction. I mean,
yeah.
I believe a lot of times the codependency really starts before the addiction, and the addiction is a way to quell codependency, right?
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
And now it's gonna yeah, I think you may answer this a little bit, but I'd love for you to kind of riff on it a bit more. You know, when you're talking about the person is kind of reeling because they want to go somewhere and their partner doesn't want to go somewhere, or maybe it's something in their work relationship or a friend relationship or whatever. Where does compromise end and codependency begin?
Yeah. Yeah, I think codependency is when I'm going to lie to myself, tell myself I don't care because I'm afraid of upsetting my partner or
Mm,
him abandoning me or whatever the bottom
mm,
line is, right? That's the codependent piece. Compromise is like, my own partner today, and I always use like 1 to 10, which it works for us. Like, "Hey, what's your number tonight on Italian food?" And I'll say, "Hey, it's only a 3." And he'll say, "Okay, let's can you be okay with Indian food?" Like, we do these numbers.
mhm,
So I think
mm,
when your compromise is just owning what you want and being okay with a compromise. It's when you deny and pretend that it's not happening or that I don't really care is when you get into a lot of trouble. And it's
mm,
funny because I often use these 3 sayings for people to identify their own codependency, and what they are is, and this not across the board, but very common for people. They'll say, "I don't care." You know, they'll be asked a legitimate yes or no question or a question, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't care, honey." Now, sometimes you may not care, but sometimes you really do. The other thing is, I'm confused, right? That's another one. So someone will ask me a direct question and I'll be like, "Oh, I can't figure that out." And I'm confused as a way to just not face the truth of what I want. And the other one is, I don't know. Like you're asked a direct question and you're like, "I don't
mm,
know." And I'm sure you've had clients like this, where I know their truth, but they can't really face it yet. So saying one of those things is this way to get distance from what my truth is. And the truth is really scary for people who are codependent because the fear is if I speak my truth, I'm going to be abandoned, rejected, left. Someone's going to get mad at me. Like it's gonna have a negative consequence rather than I'm with someone where I can speak my truth. They might have feelings, they might not, or they might just say, "Hey, I really get what you're saying. I feel different." Like you can talk about this stuff, but if you grow up in where you weren't validated or your feelings weren't acknowledged, you may have some negative feelings about or some fears around really speaking up. And speaking up is like literally the biggest tool with codependency recovery. And it's not easy if you haven't done it your whole life.
mm. Do you feel like
Yeah.
there's also the other side of that too? Because I think about people I've worked with of where you'll see some concept where, they've grown up in some instance, or no, I don't even say grown up, right? Maybe they're in a really dysfunctional relationship or whatever. And so they found themselves
Yep.
being codependent in the way that I'm very fear. I don't want people to leave me. Or it's the other thing where
Yes.
they're just like lashing out all the time, yelling at people. They're just kind of not even destroying lives, but just like creating this weird energy in their life solely because
Yes.
they were unvalidated.
Yes. I mean, that's why, codependency is so kind of tricky in a way because you can have the presentation of, say, the passive, kind of the woman that volunteers at school all the time, who never can say no, who apologizes for existing. You can have that kind of presentation. And then you can have the presentation of the person that's just super controlling, gets angry at everything, doesn't listen to anybody, has a lot of anxiety, pushes people away instead of like acquiescing. So you're absolutely right. When fear is the core, it can be presented in a variety of ways. You're
Mm.
absolutely right. Yeah.
And I think
And both are coming from fear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's important for people to know because, when you think of the tried and true examples of codependency, it really looks like these really dysfunctional relationships. Many times substances are involved or something like that, or at least there's like some kind
Yes.
of weird stuff going on relationally. But you bring up a concept where you can look at all relationships and say, one, am I getting my sense of self met through this other human? And then two, am I compromising myself to ensure that this person is happy, not out of a desire for them,
Yes.
not out of a desire to be self-sacrificial, but a
Yes.
desire out of fear. And I think that's what I heard in that. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Yes. Of course it's not caring. Like, we care about people. I mean, if the difference is my behavior coming from a choice that I really made, or is it coming from a fear? And that's really the difference. If I want to, like, do some loving stuff for my partner and I go out and, take time out of something else to do this activity or whatever, if it's a choice and I really want the best for my partner, absolutely, that's not codependency. It's when it's really this pattern of dismissing, minimizing, rationalizing, kind of making my behavior okay somehow because I'm terrified to be who I really want to
Right.
be. And
Mm,
that's what it's really about. It's not being able to be who I want to be. And
right.
that's why I think it has such consequences over time. Because if I dismiss myself enough, first of all, other people are going to start dismissing me too. It's that, we teach people how to treat us kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Mm. It makes me
Yeah.
think too, this relation into, what we know of as addiction, right? Let's not even call it like just substances, for whether it's, using substances or it's binge eating to or having to cut your leg off because of diabetes or it's pornography, whatever, right? One thing I like to say, and I know you do a lot of work in this space too, is that addiction many times will just take the qualities of who you are and turn it against you. Right. And so what I hear in this concept of codependency is it also is taking a quality of, hey, I want to be self-sacrificial to my partner. I want to be a good coworker. I want to
Yes.
be a good, son or daughter or whatever. And it turns against you. Do you think that's why this is so
Yes.
intertwined in addiction?
Yes. Really good. I mean, I also think when you say that, I was thinking, you know, one of the big consequences for being a codependent is resentment and anger. And it's challenging because a lot of times people don't know how to identify anger, express anger properly, talk about being angry. And another thing that you just mentioned is if I continue to do this certain behavior and I rationalize it, I'm not only going to have resentment at other people, I'm going to really have resentment against myself. And so I'm going to develop kind of this self hatred because I know I'm not asking for what I need and I'm dismissing myself. So you're right. It really is self abusive, just like addiction is. I mean, and yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes, like we're talking about, there's either kind of externalizers or internalizers. Now, some people who are codependent, like we just talked about, will shut down, will not speak up, will acquiesce. And then other people who are codependent will like lash out, be angry. And both, neither of them work, right? Um, and it's so crazy when you think about it, Josh, because here we are, we grow up as humans. Human beings have feelings. We have all kinds of feelings. We have a voice. We can express ourselves. And yet we have these experiences over time where we learn that none of that is okay. Oh, I can't really tell the truth. I can't express what I really want. I can't have these feelings, which is so crazy because that's the human condition.
Mhm.
And then something happens in our lives, or we go to a therapist, or we have a crisis, and it's like the person's telling us, well, the answer is to start identifying your feelings, to start getting some, in touch, have some self awareness. And it's all this stuff that is so normal to the human experience, but becomes, for whatever reason, maybe the family we were brought up in, becomes kind of pathologized when really it's just the normal human experience.
Mm, mm. It makes me think how,
Yeah.
throughout cultures, you'll see where, certain mental illness will emerge in different ways. And we talk a lot about this on the show, but it does make me think, outside of like serious mental illness and like true organic brain disease and those kind of things, when we think of these
Yes.
anxiety and these depressive disorders, to a point, that's kind of what Freud believed, right? Is this suppression of something that then will lead to this emergence of something else. And so, kind of what you're saying in this space is that the more you suppress your own emotions, the more you suppress all that down, something's going to rear its head in a weird way. And sometimes it's going to look emotionally, sometimes it's going to be thought, but many times it's going to be behaviorally. And our behaviors are going to be very unwell.
Yeah, I mean, a great example was, I had a client who was trying to get sober for a few years, and she would relapse every 6 months. And, of course, and I have my own theories about why people relapse. Everybody's different, but, there's a saying that relapse happens way before the relapse happens. So we started looking at kind of what was going on. I mean, it was this pattern. And what we discovered that she was married to kind of this controlling, dominating guy who she'd been with for 35 years. And at first, in the first 3 or 4 months, he'd be super supportive, she'd be going out to meetings, their relationship was okay, she was focused on her own recovery. But then around, like, 3, 4, 5 months, what would happen is he would start getting critical, like, "Well, you're going to too many meetings. What about our relationship? What about the" and she, because of her own guilt of her own substance abuse for so long, she would rationalize, "Well, it's okay, of course he's upset." You know what I mean? It's so easy to do that. So she would come in and tell me these things, but minimize her feelings and then eventually relapse. So it's a great example that you were just talking about, learning how to identify, tolerate, understand, and express feeling states, which is such a human condition. It's like, if we could learn to do that, maybe we wouldn't need to suddenly escape through an addiction. And I
Mm,
do believe, I mean, obviously, like you just said, outside of biology and organic brain stuff, depression and anxiety very often, and what would happen to her is she would start getting depressed. And I've had other clients either panic or depression, you know? So it's gonna manifest in some way because it's energy inside of us. And, I did a video recently with someone around the connection between anxiety and anger, and for a lot of especially women, anger is manifested as anxiety. It's much more acceptable. It's much more,
mm,
less threatening. It's easier to kind of be with, oh, I'm anxious. Much less threatening to say that than, geez, I'm super angry because people don't learn to be okay with the experience of anger. And it's totally normal, right? Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it makes me think of the concept of, we talk about on the show a lot of excitability, right? Like either have hyperexcitable or hypoexcitable symptoms. And it's really unfortunate because we use a lot of terms in our culture like I'm anxious or I'm nervous or I'm angry. And really it could be a
Right.
lot of different things, kind of what you brought up there. And so being able to name it, it sounds
Yes.
like is super important. What else do you think is really important for someone that's listening to this of thinking, I am in a codependent relationship. What do I do? Like, what are the advice that they need?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, don't freak out. Um, a lot of people have codependent symptoms. I think what happens is it's almost like when you realize you might have an addiction problem and you get terrified, like, oh my God, I gotta stop. And it becomes so terrifying that you just want to keep using. I think it's the same way with codependency. It's like the difference with addiction and codependency recovery is this: when you're quitting a substance, like, you identify the problem, you stop it, and then you're dealing with the underlying stuff. With codependency, it's much trickier because it's not like there's this one thing. Codependency is a way of relating.
Mm,
So, one thing I would say to start is oftentimes when codependents crash and burn, it's because they've been over-functioning, overdoing, and they're exhausted. So, I always say
mm, yeah.
the first tool is to have some compassion for yourself and rest. I know that sounds crazy, but usually a symptom of codependency is like your life becomes very chaotic. You've promised, 18 people different things. You can't say no to people is another big symptom of codependency. And you're usually, you're like, if you know someone like this, oh my God, they're always busy. They can't say no. Their life is in chaos. That's a sign of codependency.
Mm,
So I would say pick one thing to let go of, like one thing that's not going to crush you, that's not critical, to just start slowing down a tiny bit, just because you can't identify a problem when you're stuck in the chaos. So
mm,
that's the first thing. The second thing I would really start doing is identifying when you're in relationship, start noticing, wow, did I just tell that person the truth or did I minimize what I needed? Say my best friend said, geez, do you want to go to the X movie? And I said, oh, sure. But I didn't really want to see it. I wanted to see another movie. Like, those little examples are very telling. So I say to people, if you're not ready to speak up to your parents or your partner or whatever, just start checking in with yourself and identifying, did I just tell that person the truth or did I cover it up? And start speaking up with people that are less threatening. So, say you're at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks and the person gets your coffee wrong, say to yourself, it's important for me to ask for it to be made right. Like, it sounds so simple, but we are so easy to rationalize and minimize and say we don't care about how people treat us. But those small things will start building up in your system so you can do bigger things.
mm. I love how you brought up the concept that it's gotta come out of rest, right? That without being able to
Oh,
turn life down in some form or fashion, you're just gonna continue to churn and burn. And so ultimately, you've gotta slow life
yes.
down enough to be able to say, "Okay, what's gonna come up here?" And then you start saying, "Oh my gosh, I need to be doing something because I feel uncomfortable if I'm not doing it." And then it kinda just bridges and goes and goes. And I think it sounds like a very easy thing for do, yet in the in the current culture we live in, that's almost like doing the impossible,
Yes.
right? So how can people find a way to slow down enough in their chaotic life to identify if they're actually meeting their own needs through meeting the needs of someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I use this tool called sticking with the facts because very often with codependency or addiction, the quintessential component is denial, right? I mean, that's why people die from addiction all the time because it's one of the only illnesses that tells you you don't have it, right? I mean, when I was an addict, I'm in recovery from cocaine and alcohol. Like, it was the last thing I thought was my problem. You
Mhm,
think everything else is the problem except alcohol and substances. So, for addiction, that's what interventions are based on. Families get together with the addict and instead of them talking about their feelings and them talking about, you really are hurting me or whatever, they give facts. They say, Mom, you didn't pick me up three days last week at school. Mom, you were drunk in front of my friends. Mom, I found hidden bottles, both. So you give the person factual evidence because they can't argue with facts. So it's the same thing with codependency. It's like you can get spiraling, and very often with codependent people, it's overwhelmed. People get overwhelmed. They're like, oh my God, I can't handle it. And what really helps with overwhelm is listing the facts. Because very often, overwhelm and drama and chaos is part of kind of this addiction to that energy. So it's like a way to kind of stay detached from yourself, your world, and other people. So when I'm in a state of overwhelm, I just say, Sarah, list the facts. And very often, there might be only 2 or 3 things happening, but it's my feeling state that's getting activated. So I will say to myself, what do I need to do specifically to reduce the feeling state? Because the facts are, and this literally helps so much when you can see the facts are I only have these 2 things. What's really activating me? You know, my brother, who's a therapist, often uses this line and he says, pull the lens back. And it's so helpful because very often when we're in that crazy state, it's we're in it and we can't see the truth. We can't see reality. And once we pull the lens back and go, okay, what's really happening right here? There's not much happening. I mean, I ran out of gas the other night on this highway. This is like a good example. And it was 10 o'clock at night, and I hadn't ran out. Oh God, I don't know when I ran out of gas in my life, maybe when I was in high school. And I had all these things on my mind. And at first, I had this real fear response and this kind of edgy response. And I immediately said to myself, what are the facts? The facts were I was only 10 miles from home. The person that lives next door to me had a gas can that I knew about. I called my sweetheart on the phone. It was a beautiful night out. I was pulled over on this lawn. I mean, like, there was literally nothing wrong. But when fear gets activated and takes place, we lose that perspective. So keeping perspective is really good.
Mm. And what I love about that too is everything you're doing in that space is solely dictated, not I want to say dictated, but it's all based on you, right? Like everything you're coming back to is
Yeah.
inside yourself. So in that, you can change that, you can alter that, you can
Yes.
move that. Whereas many times, both in the addiction space and codependency space and a lot of like relational spaces, the problem is external, right? And so they're just grasping and trying to fix those things. What you're kind of bringing up here is that these are all things you can do when you stop and slow down. You can do this yourself, to yourself.
Yes.
Not it doesn't matter what your partner does, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
what your boss does, it doesn't matter what your parents do. Like this is literally a solely you thing in this moment.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, you know what, Josh? That's the good news and the bad news. I
Mm,
mean, in the sense of an addict, when I'm working with people with addiction, I always see that their moment of moving into recovery is when they see, oh, I can't blame my wife and my boss and blah, blah. I have to take responsibility for my own recovery. And it's the same thing with codependency. Oh, I can't wait till my husband changes or my boyfriend or my child or whatever. It's really about my own happiness. I can't wait for them to change. So I'm
mm,
happy. That's the delusion. So
mm,
you're right. There's a lot of power in it. And you have to give up the fantasy that I get to blame other people because there's just no it's like there's no freedom in that, and that's what I always say, like, codependency recovery is coming home to me, and that's where I'm gonna get the freedom, or that saying, like, if I'm angry with someone, it's like, giving myself poison and expecting them to die or whatever that saying is. It's like, if I'm pissed off and I'm anxious, I've got to resolve it. Nobody else can do that for me. So, yeah, that is the power of codependency recovery.
mm. And what I love in it too is that and I think you see this a lot. I don't know if I've seen this like clinically where people will get a hold of some stuff, psychoeducation wise or whatever that is. And doing the work, they come back into the relationship and they're like, "You're the worst," or "I'm done with you," or like whatever. And they're super aggressive. And it's not that either, right? It's not running around, just destroying everybody else's life. It is literally you focusing on yourself,
Absolutely.
you finding the ways to regulate yourself, you finding a self identity. And then by doing that, you then live out of that and then let the, I guess, the chips fall where they may.
Yes.
Mm,
Yeah, amen.
yeah.
I mean, the irony is, and of course the big fear is for most people in like severe codependency with say an addict is if I do X, they're gonna die. And you know what? The fact is they might. We can't control addiction. But a parent who's like says to me, for example, I can't ask them to leave, even though they're shooting up in the basement. The fact is they could die in the basement. Just because you're not
Mm,
asking them to leave doesn't mean you're keeping them alive. I mean, it's that delusional thinking. And the fact is, very often, when we can set the limit and when we can literally save ourselves, that's when magic can occur. That's when someone actually might want to get better. Not always. But you're right. Ultimately, the fear, that's that at one extreme, the fear with the other extreme, if you're just in a relationship, that's the big fear too. If I speak up or I start asking for what I need, the relationship might end. And you know what?
mm,
That's true. But I'm here to say that you're going to be in the long run much, much happier if you can get to know yourself and stop compromising yourself for someone else.
mm,
Because you know what? The other person will stop respecting you and you'll stop respecting yourself. And it really doesn't lead anywhere good. So it seems like the hard answer, but it's really not in the end. It's the road to freedom.
mm. And it's
Yeah.
being okay, it sounds like, in
And
that
I have
discomfort.
a book called go ahead. Say that again?
I said it seems like also it's being okay in that discomfort as you kinda push into that space and just allowing yourself to be there.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 words that I always say, when I have a YouTube channel, I say, "Just notice. Just notice." It's like the Buddhist thing. I mean, I've been reading Buddhism for 30 years. It's like, we don't have to get so attached to, like, these ups and downs and our feelings, it's like, just notice. It will pass, whatever it is. And you're right. I think human beings are so terrified, especially these days. I mean, not that it wasn't bad before, of just tolerating some discomfort, of sitting with a feeling without a distraction. I mean, that's what we need, to be comfortable with ourselves. You
Mm.
got it.
So for people who are listening to this, you're doing a lot of work in this space, right? You have like your YouTube channel, you have a book that's out right now. How can people find the work you're doing, connect with you in this? Because I know we just hit a little bit of the iceberg, right, of all the tools and techniques that are needed
Right.
to kind of navigate this.
Yeah, I mean, I have a book, it's called Crazy, and, some people have a trouble with that topic, but the title because most people that are codependent and would come into my office, you feel crazy. That's how people would describe it because you can't quite put your finger on what's happening. So, it's called Crazy, and a half of it is a memoir of my own journey of substance abuse and codependency, and then half of it is tools and tips and strategies to get out of codependency. And then I have a website, drsarahmichaud.com, and there's links to different podcasts. And my YouTube channel is called Leaving Crazy Town. And I do it with my best friend, Finn, who's been sober 10 years, and he's an attorney. And like you and I said at the very beginning, we try to have a sense of humor at the same time because this stuff can be so hard to shift, and we share our own mistakes. We share our own stories. We call it codependency confessions. And we also give tools and tips and be compassionate for yourself, but do take small steps because that is the way to get more happiness in your life, really. So thank you for this opportunity, Josh.
Mm, Dr. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I think this is a really good conversation. It makes me go into, I'm going to contemplate this for a while, just all these different things. And I think our listeners will too, because I think there's a lot in this, right? And so, as you know, no matter where you're at and what you're doing, I
Mm.
think there's some important knowledge in this. And so, no matter what, just try to slow down and feel out what's going on in your own self, because it sounds like that, no matter what you're doing, that's where you have to start. But Dr. Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. If you guys want to connect with, like she just said, this will be on the YouTube, just right below here. If you're listening on your podcast, it'll be in the show notes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing. This was good.
Thank you, my friend. Awesome.